Imagine trying to build an entire airfield from scratch on a remote, jungle-covered island in the middle of a war zone, with no roads, no equipment, and enemy forces lurking. Sounds impossible, right? This is the unbelievable true story of the U.S. Navy Seabees, the unsung heroes who literally built victory in the Pacific, one airstrip at a time. Ever felt overwhelmed by a DIY project? Now imagine that project is an entire military airfield on a remote island under constant threat with no existing infrastructure. That was the daily reality for the U.S. Navy Seabees. Discover how these audacious engineers didn't just overcome logistical nightmares, but fundamentally changed the course of WWII by building the air superiority that won the Pacific. We are unpacking the staggering impact of the U.S. Navy Seabees, revealing how these construction battalions transformed remote, unforgiving Pacific islands into critical air bases, literally building the infrastructure that enabled Allied air superiority. This is the untold story of their audacious engineering, overcoming logistical nightmares and enemy threats to pave the path to victory. Their motto, Construimus, Batuimus, or We Build, We Fight, was not just a phrase, it was their daily operational reality. They did not just support the fighting men, they created the platform from which the fighting was made possible. The theater of war in the Pacific was defined by geography. Thousands of islands, separated by vast empty ocean. The islands themselves were a study in contrasts, stunningly beautiful, yet brutally hostile to development. These were remote, undeveloped Pacific islands, lush with dense jungle canopy, unforgiving volcanic rock, razor harp coral, or swampy, malarial lowland. Militarily, in their natural state, they were virtually useless for projecting sustained air power. They offered excellent cover for small defending garrisons, but nothing resembling the mile-long, heavy-duty runways required by the twin-engine bombers and high-performance fighters of the Allied forces. They were a logistical nightmare, lacking deep water ports, roads, or any existing utilities. They were a blank green canvas, but one that actively fought back against any attempt to impose order upon it. The desperate need for air superiority. In the vast distances of the Pacific, air superiority was not merely an advantage, it was non-negotiable for the Allied war effort. Air power was the protective umbrella that allowed troop transports and supply ships to operate. It was the fist that could pound enemy positions before an amphibious landing. Crucially, it was the key to neutralizing the formidable Japanese Navy and their own land-based air forces. The famous island-hopping strategy was entirely dependent on securing an island, and then, with breathtaking speed, turning it into a forward air base capable of supporting the next leap toward the Japanese mainland. Without airfields, the war slowed to a crawl, susceptible to counterattack. The Allies needed bases closer to the action, shortening the distance that their aircraft had to travel, allowing for more bomb load, more fuel, and less fatigue. They needed to project power from places where no one had ever projected power before. The immediate problem, a logistical void. The operational reality created an immediate paradoxical problem. How do you move massive construction equipment and thousands of tons of materials onto an island that has no docks to land at, no roads to transport on, and no cleared land to work from? The initial landings were often conducted under fire, with every piece of equipment needing to be wrestled ashore across coral reefs and treacherous beaches. The logistical void was absolute. A traditional Army Corps of Engineers unit, accustomed to working behind established lines, was not suitable for this kind of forward-edge, high-risk construction. They needed a force that was not only skilled in every facet of construction, from clearing jungle to pouring concrete, but also fully trained and equipped to fight as infantry the moment the enemy appeared. The war effort demanded an unprecedented blend of combat toughness and civilian engineering expertise. The stage was set for the entrance of a truly unconventional force. The U.S. Navy recognized the critical gap in their operational capability almost immediately following the attack on Pearl Harbor. They needed builders, not just soldiers. The traditional military structure was incapable of meeting the sheer scale and speed of the construction demands. Thus, in December 1941, Admiral Ben Moriel, chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, requested authority to establish naval construction battalions. The men recruited were not fresh-faced youths, but seasoned veterans of the construction trade: ironworkers, mechanics, plumbers, carpenters, and engineers, many of them in their late 30s and 40s, lured by higher pay and the opportunity to serve using the skills they already possessed. They came from the biggest construction projects in America: building the Boulder Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, and the skyscrapers of New York. The initials CB for Construction Battalion quickly led to the nickname Seabees, and their unofficial motto, "Can Do," encapsulated their unique spirit. They were trained to use both a blueprint and a rifle, blending the civilian's skill with the soldier's resolve. First encounters with impossible tasks. The initial shock for these veteran builders was profound. They were used to well-stocked supply chains and heavy-duty modern infrastructure. What they found was a primitive, hostile environment. Their first assignments were often the most perilous, landing on an island immediately following the initial invasion wave, often while pockets of enemy resistance were still active. Their first task on many islands was simply to carve out a place to work, often having to fight for the ground they were meant to build on. They were given timelines that defied belief: an operational fighter strip in 4 days, a fully functional air base with fuel dumps and barracks in 4 weeks. They were asked to do the impossible, with insufficient resources, under constant threat, and in a climate that turned earth-moving into a sweat-drenched endurance test. The phrase "impossible task" became simply the next job. Ingenuity under pressure, improvising victory. The Seabees' true genius lay in their ability to improvise. When specialized equipment was sunk or unavailable, they built their own. One famous example involved the desperate need to pack down soft, coral-based runways. Instead of waiting for a proper roller, they welded steel plates onto the tires of their heavy trucks, creating ad hoc, multi-ton compactors. They learned that the coral found on many islands, when crushed and mixed with water, set like low-grade concrete, saving them thousands of tons of shipping weight. When fresh water was scarce, they built elaborate distillation and filtration systems. When their bulldozers broke down, a constant problem in the corrosive tropical environment, they became expert field mechanics, cannibalizing 4 broken machines to create one working one. They developed specialized landing craft. The LST, landing ship tank, became their floating workshop, and they devised faster, safer ways to blast through coral reefs to clear channels for transports. Their hands-on, problem-solving ingenuity was the key ingredient that turned the Navy's strategic plan into a physical reality. The sheer scale of the Seabees' construction was monumental, often carried out at a breakneck pace. On Guadalcanal, for instance, they took the unfinished, bomb-damaged Japanese fighter strip at Henderson Field and, working under constant shelling and air raids, expanded it into a fully operational, heavy bomber-capable base. What normally takes months of civilian planning and preparation, they delivered in a matter of weeks. They transformed the dense jungle canopy into functional runways, barracks, fuel depots, and aircraft maintenance hangars. A single runway often required the movement of hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of earth, rock, and coral. At Tinian, for example, Seabees constructed 4 parallel bomber runways, each 8,500 feet long, transforming a sugarcane plantation into the busiest airfield in the world, the base from which the B-29s launched their final strategic bombing campaign against Japan. It was the physical construction that made the strategic bombing possible. The Seabees were constantly engaged in a two-front war. The human enemy was ever present, in the form of snipers, nighttime infiltration attempts, and kamikaze air raids. They worked with their rifles slung over their backs, ready to drop their tools and engage in combat. But nature was often the more relentless adversary. The islands were a breeding ground for tropical diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and filariasis, which incapacitated more men than direct enemy action. Typhoons could wipe out weeks of work in a single night, reducing roads to mud and washing out runways. The coral they used for construction was incredibly difficult to drill and blast. The relentless humidity and salt-laden air corroded their equipment, demanding constant maintenance. They were essentially fighting a tropical construction battle, battling the heat, the insects, the mud, the rock, and the enemy simultaneously, all to meet an impossible deadline. Examples of engineering marvels. The Seabees' legacy is written in the geography of the Pacific. At Guadalcanal, they famously maintained Henderson Field under fire, even operating their tractors by day and using them as barricades by night. At Iwo Jima, their work was perhaps the most desperate. Landing just hours after the first wave, they worked on the volcanic sand under the heavy, direct fire from the surrounding high ground. Despite continuous mortar and artillery bombardment, they managed to repair and expand the main runway, creating a vital emergency landing site for damaged B-29s returning from Japan. This one island saved the lives of thousands of airmen. On the massive island of Guam, they built everything from scratch. Deep water port facilities capable of handling the entire Pacific fleet, massive dry docks for repairing ships, and multiple airfields and support bases. These were not just temporary bases. They were permanent industrial complexes carved out of the wilderness, serving as self-sufficient hubs for the forward movement of the Allied forces. Their work provided the foundation, literally and figuratively, for every major offensive in the Pacific. The air bases the Seabees built were the essential stepping stones of the island-hopping strategy. Their work connected the dots between isolated victories, transforming a successful invasion into a self-sustaining operational base. The runways built on Saipan and Tinian allowed B-29 superfortresses, the largest bombers in the world at the time, to be brought within striking range of the Japanese home islands. Without the massive, stable runways the Seabees constructed on these Mariana Islands, the strategic air campaign that devastated Japanese industrial capacity would have been impossible. Their engineering didn't just support the fighting. It directly enabled the high-altitude, long-range missions that crippled the enemy's ability to wage war. Every yard of runway they laid shortened the war by reducing the logistical burden and increasing the striking power of the Allied air forces. Logistical masterminds, maintaining the pipeline. The Seabees' role extended far beyond the initial construction. Once the bases were operational, they became the logistical masterminds behind the entire supply pipeline. They were responsible for building and maintaining the massive fuel and ammunition depots required to keep hundreds of aircraft flying daily. They set up immense supply storage facilities, warehouses, refrigeration plants, and communication centers. Critically, they were the front-line repair and maintenance crew for the entire infrastructure. When a runway was cratered by enemy fire, it was the Seabees who had it patched and operational within hours. When a dock was damaged, they were the ones who repaired it under the clock. They became the indispensable element of base security, maintenance, and expansion, ensuring that the relentless flow of men, material, and aviation fuel continued without interruption, regardless of the challenges. Beyond runways, building living infrastructure. A military base is more than a runway and a fuel tank. It is a living, functional city supporting tens of thousands of personnel. The Seabees built the entire infrastructure required for sustained human operations. This meant constructing miles of paved roads, building and maintaining sophisticated electrical generation plants, and running extensive water purification and plumbing systems. They built immense field hospitals capable of complex surgery, mess halls capable of feeding thousands, and barracks and recreational facilities necessary for maintaining the morale of the troops. In short, they brought the fundamental elements of civilization and industrial capacity to the most remote and hostile environments on Earth. The air bases were the teeth of the Allied war machine, but the Seabees built the skeleton and the muscle that allowed those teeth to bite. Their comprehensive infrastructure ensured that the forces could fight not just effectively, but also live and recover while doing so. With the close of the war, the Seabees' work didn't end. It simply changed direction. Their rapid deployment, heavy construction expertise was immediately translated into global infrastructure development. The skills honed in the jungles of the Pacific, rapid construction, deep water port development, and the establishment of complex logistics chains became invaluable in the post-war reconstruction efforts across the globe. They played a vital role in building airfields, roads, bridges, and hospitals in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, paving the way for international commerce and humanitarian aid. The training and engineering techniques they pioneered became the foundation for modern military and civilian rapid construction organizations, proving that their can-do spirit was a permanent asset to the nation. Lessons learned: the enduring can-do spirit. The legacy of the Seabees is not just in the concrete they poured, but in the enduring spirit they instilled. The can-do attitude became a fundamental lesson in operational ingenuity. The importance of adaptability, improvisation, and teamwork when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. This spirit is highly relevant today, not just in military operations, but in civilian applications like disaster relief and global infrastructure development. When a hurricane strikes or an earthquake cripples a major city, the modern equivalents of the Seabees are the first to arrive, rapidly clearing debris, establishing power, and rebuilding critical infrastructure to sustain life. They proved that with skill, determination, and a refusal to acknowledge the word impossible, any challenge can be overcome. The Seabees' story is one of unsung sacrifice. While they did not always carry the frontline rifle, they were always on the front line of engineering, working under fire, facing down typhoons, disease, and exhaustion to meet their deadlines. Hundreds were killed, and thousands were wounded in the course of their service. Their critical contribution, the literal paving of the path to victory, often gets overlooked in the telling of great battles. They were the men who made the strategic bombing campaign possible. They were the men who saved thousands of airmen by providing emergency landing fields. They were the men who turned useless patches of jungle into the most decisive operational bases of the war. Their service was a monumental feat of engineering audacity, combat toughness, and unwavering dedication to the mission. We must remember the Seabees, the builders and fighters who literally built the air superiority that won the Pacific, one airstrip at a time. From the desolate beaches of Guadalcanal to the vast runways of Tinian, the story of the Seabees is a testament to the power of American ingenuity under pressure. They are the unsung construction battalion, whose dedication to their craft, willingness to fight, and unbreakable can-do spirit fundamentally changed the course of World War II. They didn't just fight for freedom. They built its foundation.